6. Who rules the economic roost? By controlling the supply chains, large food corporations rule the economic roost, so they set the economic rules. As the dominant buyers, they put pressure on farmers and other producers in the vertically integrated supply chain, compelling them to produce greater quantities of cheap food the corporations want grown. By specializing and controlling the entire process, including the necessary raw materials, such as seeds or young animals, these corporations minimize both risk and expense while establishing uniformity among their products. The individual farmers have to provide the land, facilities, time, and labor needed to produce foodstuffs, while the raw materials remain the same. In fact, the average farmer today earns only 14 cents on every dollar spent on food in the United States, compared to 36 cents in 1974. With so many calories on the market, the critical issue these companies face is the fact that as humans we can only eat so much in one day. The stomach has a fixed ceiling. How do the companies solve this essentially biological problem? Make portion sizes larger, offer irresistibly cheap deals, tempt you with candy impulse buys at the checkout counter, and create foods that leave the consumer with enough room and the desire for more. The list of techniques is long, frightening, and subtle. At the same time, access to healthier foods such as fresh fruit and vegetables is limited by price manipulations generated by government subsidization of foods like corn, soy, and wheat. For the millions of Americans on food stamps, for example, the few dollars a day they have to spend makes it almost impossible for them to choose to eat healthfully. Since the government supports the production of unhealthy processed foods, they are cheaper and more readily available. The U.S. government's artificial support of processed foods makes it impossible for people of low or no income to afford a balanced diet, because a bag of apples is more expensive than sugary breakfast cereal. Only desserts in food deserts? Assuming, that is, that these individuals even have access to a bag of apples. Millions of Americans, and particularly people in inner-city neighborhoods, live in food deserts, areas where local stores within a 5-mile radius do not even carry fresh fruit and vegetables. In fact, one recent study has shown that grocery stores are 4 times more likely to be built in predominantly Caucasian neighborhoods than African American communities, while African Americans are 30% more likely to die from diet-related heart disease. How empowering is the modern supermarket, convenience store, or restaurant to these individuals when the choices are limited to unhealthy, refined, sugary foods that can lead to obesity, chronic illness, and an early death? How empowering indeed is the modern food establishment for any of us, when the government's policies intentionally make healthy, real foods more expensive by subsidizing the mad? What ultimately is the point of having a food system that does not do what food should do? Nourish us. The door that keeps revolving. Unfortunately, government officials are as likely to have a relationship with the food industry as they are to police it. Not only do these corporations put pressure on the U.S. government through their lobbying power, but there is also a revolving door between government and industry. Many government officials leave their bureaucratic positions to work for major food corporations, while an equal number have left the corporate world to enter the realm of government. Former Secretary of Agriculture Ann Veneman, for instance, hired a lobbyist for the meat industry as her chief of staff. On the other hand, Veneman's predecessor left his position as Secretary of Agriculture to work for the food industry, which often has far better pay. These individuals certainly have the knowledge and experience often required to work as a regulator or a corporate employee. Nevertheless, there is always the risk of conflict of interest. How can we be sure they will act in the interest of public health rather than their former colleagues, if there is a conflict between the two? Even if there is no such relationship in place, the food industry can still influence the U.S. government in favor of its own interests. A disturbing example of this sway is the recent sugar controversy between the U.S. government and the WHO. In 2003, the WHO, concerned about the rising obesity epidemic, recommended that the average individual should limit his or her added sugar consumption to less than 10% of daily calories. This percentage was based on a conclusive body of scientific evidence on the dangers of excess sugars in the human diet. Nonetheless, the sugar industry, unhappy with the limit capped on its product sales in the name of health, put pressure on the U.S. government, which subsequently threatened to withdraw funding from the WHO if they did not change their dietary guidelines. A year later, the 10% added sugar recommendation disappeared from the WHO's Global Report on Diet. An article in BMJ highlights how the food industry's manipulation of nutritional science continues to pose a threat to our health. Overall, industry-funded research generally favors the products of food corporations. For example, according to a 2013 study published on PLOS Medicine, a peer-reviewed online medical journal, papers whose research was supported by big agriculture's dollars were 5 times more likely to say that there was no positive association between sugar consumption and weight gain. With companies such as Nestle, Coca-Cola, and PepsiCo funding organizations such as the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, SACN, and Medical Research Council's Human Nutrition Research Unit, HNR, how do we ensure that conflicts of interest do not occur? From 2001 to 2012, only 13 out of the 40 scientists at the SACN claimed they had no interests to declare. What of the other 27 scientists? Whose interests possibly biased their interpretations of their work? The sugar industry? The meat industry? The dairy industry? The list of potential biases can go on and on. David versus the Food Goliath. Smaller, more biologically diverse family farms cannot compete with the power of these large food corporations. In terms of bushels per acre, or animals per acre, small family farms do not meet the surface productivity of large farms. Large farms supported by the capital of big industry and big government subsidies. At the same time, these smaller farmers lack the financial resources to compete with big agriculture for governmental influence, through the large-scale funding of election campaigns, for example. Is it any wonder that the small family farm is slowly disappearing from agriculture, while a mere 8% of farms produce 63% of our food? By taking cheaply grown or raised commodities and producing processed foods sold at premium prices, these large corporations are able to expand their profits. Through what farmer and food activist Wendell Berry describes as the logic of short-term economies of scale, these companies aim to keep profits high and expenses low by producing as many goods as possible for the cheapest price possible. Externalized costs, or the effects of such short-term practices, are left for us as a society to take care of. A percentage of our taxes, for instance, are used for farming subsidies, the treatment of diet-related diseases, and environmental issues such as the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, which is related to chemical runoff from conventional agriculture. Indeed, since many of these externalized costs are long-term in nature, such as global warming, chronic illnesses, and water pollution, we are shackling our descendants with the true cost of creating the modern food industry. When I look at our broken food system, one alarming scripture comes to mind. The Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. Numbers chapter 14, verse 18. What kind of future are we leaving for our children? How, I ask each one of us, is participating in this dysfunctional food system part of God's commandment to love our neighbors as we love ourselves, including our neighbors of the future? Mark chapter 12, verse 31. or to love God, through and for whom all things, including the world and all the wonderful living organisms in it, were made, with all our hearts, souls, and minds. Mark chapter 12, verse 30. John chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. Is this bringing heaven or hell to earth? Matthew chapter 6, verse 10. What curses are we leaving on future generations? Our current food system is wasted. It is a tragic fact that this short-term logic of exploitation for gain has created an international food system that is characterized not only by vast amounts of convenient, cheap foods, but also by what has come to be known as the global waste scandal. Today, we could feed the world's starving with a percentage of the food that is thrown away throughout the world. From bananas left to rot in piles on a farm in Ecuador, where large numbers of people are starving because they do not meet the supermarket regulations of what a banana should look like, to the thousands of pounds of perfectly edible animal parts that do not please our sensibilities, regardless of the fact that our ancestors ate them, the industrial food system generates more food waste than ever before in human history. In fact, as author and activist Tristram Stewart indicates, in the space of 24 hours, a supermarket can throw away enough food to feed more than 100 people. These statistics are truly shocking. Yet we are all to blame. Industry and households combined waste an estimated 1.3 billion tons of food each year, an alarming figure that excludes the tons of water we also waste. Many sustainable food activists, in fact, see a direct correlation between cheap food and waste. If I only paid $1.99 for my fast food burger, or for the giant box of cereal I bought at the store yesterday, what does it matter if I throw most of it away? It was so cheap after all. The less an item costs us, the less we tend to value it. This scandal is no less than the theft of the world's natural resources. Indeed, we are essentially stealing from God Himself, who commands us to be good stewards of His creation and to care for those less fortunate than ourselves throughout the Old and New Testaments. This abuse of our natural resources is one of the major reasons why close to 1 billion people are dying of malnutrition and starvation in our world today. Good intentions should not sway good decisions. Undoubtedly, not everyone involved in the global food industry is dominated by the logic of corporate capitalism. A number of the pioneers of the industrial food movement, and many of the individuals involved in the industry today, view their work as necessary in light of the world's expanding population, like many of the individuals behind the original Farm Bill did. For example, the 1970 Nobel Peace Prize winner Norman Borlaug, often referred to as the father of the Green Revolution in agriculture, was able to feed millions of starving people through his work on the mass production of wheat at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center in Mexico. Indeed, my own father was a food technologist in Africa, and his passion was to marry the traditional bakery to modern technology, thereby supporting the development of businesses in impoverished communities. However, we still have to deal with the consequences of the convenience, efficiency, and productivity of our global food system, no matter how many good intentions support it. As Gustafson points out in We the Eaters, we have to adopt Borlaug's innovative thinking, but not necessarily his methods. The current food system not only leaves almost 1 billion people starving while billions of dollars of food is wasted, but also feeds the rest of us food products that cause disease and death while damaging our health and the rest of God's wonderful creation. It is imperative that we renew the way we imagine global food production and consumption. Romans chapter 12, verse 2. The huge corporations and industrial farms may dominate in Washington, but if we, the public, vote with our wallets and encourage the innovative thinkers, we can make a substantial difference.